If you're watching this video at the time of its debut, you're most likely under some form of lockdown order.
The coronavirus is still on everyone's minds, so don't forget to wash your minds.
While the Trump administration has mainly used its federal powers to assist state governors in their duties, and resisted invoking the Defense Production Act at least temporarily and in a limited degree, other nations have taken different approaches. Sweden, for now, remains open, the last country in Europe to allow restaurants and bars to operate. In other nations, elected officials are being berated for standing 2 meters away from their own family members, having broken no laws.
So does that mean, just to be crystal clear, that sunbathing is against the law?
Sunbathing is against the rules that have been set out for important public health reasons.
While the president of Spain was banned from Twitter for giving unapproved information, Germany has unveiled a scheme to issue immunity certificates to those who pass a test for the coronavirus antibodies. Perhaps a barcode system? Or maybe they can wear some sort of an easily visible badge like a star. But when it comes to lockdowns, the UK has said hold my corona as it stepped up the ridiculous extremes of its police force to hunting dog walkers, destroying scenic locations, and berating an MP for bringing his parents a birthday cake, and down to policing Easter eggs as a non-essential item. This time, the UK has chosen to follow the German example, and has decided to issue what it calls immunity passports.
And on the immunity certificate, we are looking at an immunity certificate, at how we can, how people who have had the disease, have got the antibodies, and therefore have immunity, can show that, and so get back as much as normal as much as possible to normal life. That is an important thing that we will be doing and are looking at, but it's too early in the science of the immunity that comes from having had the disease that Steve spoke about earlier. It's too early in that science to be able to put clarity around that. I wish that I wish that we could, but the reason that we can't is because the science isn't yet advanced enough.
Not satisfied there, they have also passed the Coronavirus Act 2020. This biblically large stack of Orwellian emergency powers granted in this bill had MPs in Parliament in tears even as they signed it through.
I mean, I could speak for the time I have available several times over just on the provisions relating to the retention of DNA, which we dealt with in the Protections of Freedoms Bill. I see from the expression on my right honourable friend's face that she understands the anguish. She probably knows it better than any of us that we're all going through in delivering this. We are, perhaps let me be the first to say it, implementing tonight and in this bill at least a dystopian society. Somebody will call it totalitarian, though I don't think that's quite fair, but it is at least dystopian. It is implementing a command society under the imperative of saving hundreds of thousands of lives and millions of jobs, and it is worth doing. And by God, I do hope that the Prime Minister has a clear conscience tonight and sleeps with a good heart, because he deserves to do so. Because libertarian though I may be, this is the right thing to do. But my goodness, we ought not to allow this situation to endure one moment longer than is absolutely necessary to save lives and preserve jobs.
In this video, we will focus heavily on the Coronavirus Act 2020 and the powers it grants to the NHS tzars in the UK. But first, we need to address the tests. In my previous video, I expressed concern about the prevalence of false positives. This is Matt Hancock, Secretary of State for Health, UK.
And there's a challenge too of making sure that the public can have confidence in tests. Several of the tests that we're currently checking have failed. In one case, a test that I'm being urged to buy missed 3 out of 4 positive cases of coronavirus. That means in 3/4 of cases, that test would have given the false comfort of sending someone with coronavirus back on the wards. Approving tests that don't work is dangerous, and I will not do it. On the testing, we've now bought 17.5 million tests, subject to them working. And we're undertaking those tests, of the tests. As I said, the early results of some of them has not performed well, and we are, but we're hopeful that they will improve, and that the later tests that we've got our hands on will be able to be reliable enough for people to use them with confidence.
The UK has 18 million tests ready to go, and they might all be faulty. Even worse than a false positive, these tests send the virulent back into the public with the assurance that they are safe.
Of sending someone with coronavirus back on the wards.
The number of people killed by COVID-19 in Spain rose by more than 10,000 today after another 950 people died.
And that's not all for emergency measures in the UK. If you thought the stock market was bad already, how would you like to be an investor in a British bank? The government has ordered the cancellation of $8 billion of dividends payments. Dividends, of course, being a percentage that the bank owes you of your share value in a set period of time. This move to cancel the shares, which usually decreases share value, then caused the share value to decrease despite not paying out. So while the shareholders were already hard hit, this move doubled and then tripled down on the damage. When what might have been a more sensible move was to pay out the dividends and then issue new stock. Pay off the investors who invested in you and then raise some new funds. The Prudential Regulation Authority also told the banks that they should cancel any bonuses that have not yet been paid out, including all material risk takers. So if you've taken financial risks that have paid off, too bad, you're not getting paid. And imagine being one of the guys who hasn't been paid yet this year. Not done with the damage there though. It turns out that some of these banks are actually owned by the taxpayer. The Royal Bank of Scotland will lose out on $968 million, $600 million going to the Treasury because of these cancellations. And now we get to the heart of the video, the Coronavirus Act 2020, the UK's Emergency Act against the coronavirus. Now this report, or this act, is way too big to read, to review, to cover everything of. That's got expanding subtopics that refer to prior and existing laws that you then need to go to a whole nother page for. It's too much. And it was too much for the MPs who passed the damn thing too. So what we're going to do instead is pick out some of the sections that stand out, and I'll point out problems that I have with them. My first objection comes down here at section 10, mental health and mental capacity. Temporary modification of mental health and mental capacity legislation. As you can see here, you get to the page and it wants you to go Schedule 8, Schedule 9, Schedule 10, and Schedule 11. So what you have to do is go back to your table of contents, go all the way down here. Schedule. Emergency detention. Compulsory treatment orders. Nurses' power to detain. Suspension of requirements to review orders and directions authorizing a detention. An approved medical practitioner may grant a short-term detention certificate in respect of a patient without consulting a mental health officer if that practitioner considers that compliance with the requirement to consult a mental health officer is impractical or would involve undesirable delay. So one doctor can now lock you in the nut house, at least temporarily, and one mental health care practitioner can do it permanently. Schedule 8, Part 2, Paragraph 3. An application by an approved mental health professional under Section 2 or 3 made during a period for which this paragraph has effect may be founded on a recommendation by a single registered medical practitioner. That means one doctor, one healthcare, one medical practitioner can detain you indefinitely, actually without review, where they can then medicate you against your will, and the requirement to do so is actually lowered from healthcare practitioner to persons. This is especially concerning given the vaccination and immunization provisions. As we've seen, nurses and even doctors can detain you and medicate you against your will, and sometimes it doesn't even need to be a doctor to do that. But maybe this is necessary, and I'm sure they're just trying to do their best. They don't have any ill intention. Well, we can hope not, because the health service indemnification removes any legal responsibility that they have for their patients. Hey guys, so I'm doing some editing right now, and I hit the section on the legal indemnification for NHS workers, and I went, oh no, am I sure I know what I'm talking about here? Indemnification, by its definition, it could well mean that they're going to protect NHS workers from damages. So if you get sick from corona while you're working with us, we'll compensate you. Or if you have some sort of damages, right, we'll compensate you. And I think it probably does mean that. But just to double check that I didn't, destroy a significant segment of my video by misunderstanding, I'm here at the gov.uk website and the Department of Health and Social Care. Thankfully, they've clarified this issue for me. The Coronavirus Act 2020 will provide indemnity for clinical negligence liabilities arising from NHS activities carried out for the purposes of dealing with or because of the coronavirus outbreak. This will ensure that those providing healthcare service activity across the UK are legally protected for the work they are required to undertake as part of the COVID-19 response. The Act indemnifies a person in respect of a qualifying liability incurred by the person, or to make arrangements for a person to be indemnified in respect to a qualifying liability. References in this section to a qualifying liability are to a liability in tort in respect of or consequence on death, personal injury or loss arising out of or in connection with a breach of duty of care owed in connection with the provision after coming into force of this section of a relevant service. Basically, you got corona and we kill you, we're not responsible. This is a wide degree of latitude for those foreign NHS workers that you rely so heavily on. Let's hope they haven't learned too much about power and privilege dynamics. As I'm sure you're aware of, the NHS has decided to stop treating racists. And now they've decided to stop treating a lot more people. Intensive care limited to those reasonably certain to live, NHS Trust reveals. NHS doctors have been forced to significantly tighten their intensive care admission criteria since the beginning of the outbreak. Apparently they're short on resources when they haven't even started yet. And this is because they're planning to use the resources for a long time. And so doctors must be reasonably certain the patient will recover before they use them now. In normal times, we will give most people the benefit of the doubt. That has changed. Delaying their death for 2 or 3 weeks is not the right thing to do for them or for society, the NHS says. A department head at Imperial College Healthcare revealed that fewer and fewer marginal patients are being selected for ventilator treatment because so many serious cases require up to 2 weeks on the machines. However, They deny people are being denied care due to capacity problems. They said, very poorly patients with coronavirus may need to be on a ventilator for extended periods. So they're just not doing it. Meanwhile, palliative care doctors have advised that family members should ask elderly loved ones if they want hospital treatment in the event they deteriorate with coronavirus. No, fuck, let me suffer, come on. In its efforts to imitate China, the UK has decided to rapidly build several emergency hospitals they've dubbed Nightingale hospitals, of course, named after the famous wartime nurse. However, the volunteers at these Nightingale hospitals have been told to expect a 60 to 80% mortality rate. This is a survival rate I would think more in line with an extermination camp. These fearsome expectations, whose predictions don't even seem to be borne out in old age care homes, are particularly suspect when considering the legal indemnity, the weakening of oversight, and the cancelling of cause of death autopsies.
The language used by the Prime Minister and his aides is martial. Talk of battle lines being drawn. So it's right the military was asked to deliver this logistical and engineering masterclass. Skills honed on the battlefields of Afghanistan, deployed to the front line in East London. These aren't just partitioned beds. The NHS Nightingale is the world's largest critical care unit, fully equipped to deal exclusively with very sick COVID-19 patients. And these ventilators, in short supply nationwide, will soon be plumbed into a 4-mile-long oxygen tube network.
You can't help but be struck by the sheer enormity of this project. This corridor is 1 kilometre long.
The same standard is occurring back in the NHS.
And they are going to be critical care beds like the ones that you would see in any hospital. It is, of course, a facility that many in this country would hope that we would never have to see, but it is a reflection that the number of cases just keep going up. And it's also been announced today that more Nightingales, as they've been described, are going to be opened in other parts of the country. So there's going to be one in Bristol and Harrogate to really deal with the number of patients that keep increasing, to try and take pressure off hospitals as the cases continue to rise.
The first thing I'd say is that building the extra capacity is incredibly important. I'm so proud of the people who've built the Nightingale Hospital in 9 days, and the role of the Gurkhas and the military and the NHS all working together to make that happen. And we are rolling that out to Birmingham and to Manchester and to Glasgow, as I said, but we don't rule out putting temporary hospitals in other parts of the country too.
And all of that stuff has the potential to be pretty bad. If there's no proper oversight and stuff, but I'm sure there will be. Except, what's this? The changes to the registration of deaths and stillbirths. The confirmatory medical certificate not required for cremations. And the suspension of cause of death investigations. So, nobody's legally responsible for you if you die, and nobody's going to investigate how you died. But you can pretty much guarantee it's going to be written down as coronavirus. Perhaps the problems with this are most clearly demonstrated in this provision of the bill. Suspension of requirement to hold inquest with jury if senior coroner has reason to suspect by notifiable disease, etc. COVID-19 is not a notifiable disease. This section applies to an inquest that is opened while this section is in force, regardless of the date of death. So they could have died last year, maybe. And if you thought the Patriot Act was bad, Part 2, powers related to potentially infectious persons in England. Down here, ancillary powers. Part 5, a constable may enter any place for the purposes of the exercise of a power conferred by this part of the schedule. The UK currently has no such thing as privacy or freedom from search and seizure.
In most parts of the world, due to lockdown, most of the transmission that's actually happening in many countries now is happening in the household, at family level. in some senses, transmission has been taken off the streets and pushed back into family units. Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them in a safe and dignified manner.
Another troubling provision in this vein says a local authority does not have to comply with any duties imposed by the following provisions. Section 47(2) of that Act. Duty to prevent or mitigate loss or damage to property of adults being cared for away from home. Does that mean your cat and dog can be left to starve? Does that just mean your car can be left on the side of the road? Does that mean that your stove can be left on? What does that mean? And shouldn't it be the citizens who are being protected from loss, not the government? Illegal transport or disposal of bodies or failure to keep records seems to only be punishable with a fine. In regards to disposal of a body, deceased person's wishes, the following do not apply. Section 46, Part 3 of the Public Health Control and Disease Act, 1984. Local authority not to cause body to be cremated under that section contrary to the wishes of the deceased. That's being suspended. Regulations 6 and 13A of the Cremation Belfast Regulations. Well, fuck that law, because now it's being suspended. Which provide that the remains of the person not be cremated if it is known that the person has left written direction to the contrary. You can spend hundreds of years building these things up, but it only takes one emergency act to strike them all down. These quarantines must end. Resources and materials are running out, and patience is running out. And yet I've seen projections that push this into next winter, that have periods of social isolation or social distancing, and then a month of freedom, and then a month and a half or 2 months of social distancing, and then a month of freedom. Like this chart here, posted on MIT Technology Review, made by Imperial College COVID-19 Response Team. Imperial College, of course, being the ones to do all the numbers projections. And if you look at the chart here, you see we begin social distancing at the end of March, and sometime at the end of July, we reopen for a month, maybe a little less than a month. Beginning of September, we close for social distancing again. Beginning of November, we open up for a little while till the end of November. And we keep doing this until next year, until a year and a half from now, November 2021. The vitamin D shortages alone, caused by prolonged quarantine, will weaken immune systems, increasing burdens on the hospitals. Between economic stress, social anxiety, and the prolonging of seasonal affective disorder, there will be a spike in overdoses and suicides which is likely to force an end to the quarantines, lest they alone overburden the healthcare system and the mortuaries more than COVID would under the fading worst-case projections. And of course, for each suicide you could expect probably at least 5 to have some sort of hospitalization for attempted harm.
That's the thing about COVID-19. It doesn't care about how rich you are, how famous you are, how funny you are, how smart you are, where you live, how old you are, what amazing stories you can tell. It's the great equalizer. And what's terrible about it is what's great about it. What's terrible about it is it's made us all equal in many ways. And what's wonderful about it is that it's made us all equal in many ways.
European nurses are committing suicide. The German finance minister committed suicide. And it is contagious as well. And some of these celebrities are looking pretty haggard. If Ellen DeGeneres offed herself, we'd see an exodus of menopausal housewives attempting to follow with bottles of pills and boxes of wine.
I, like everybody, am feeling stir-crazy and anxious and wondering what's going to happen and how long this is going to last. Stay safe. Pay attention to what they're telling us to do, and this will pass much faster if we all listen to what our smart people are telling us to do. And I mean the smart people. Goodbye.
This is CNN Breaking News.